Propaganda played a major role in changing public opinion during the Vietnam War. Propaganda came in many forms from many sources, whether it was one of their various news channels, in the paper, or in-person speeches. Propaganda was changing public opinion for all demographics of people. The Vietnam War lasted 19 years. In order to keep the war efforts and positive public opinion of the war, mass amounts of propaganda were necessary by Johnson and Nixon. Finally, the government knew they needed to justify their actions in Vietnam. Therefore, they provoked the North to act first and left key information out of President Johnson's address.
The Vietnam War was one of the longest and highest casualty counts of any war America has fought in. That being said, at the beginning of the war, support was fairly high, with the provoked attack on the United States troops rather than just South Vietnamese troops. Johnson was CBS News. Fred Friendly claimed, "You can't commit a country to fight a war unless you can make the country hate the enemy." This is exactly what the United States government and many other news sources did to keep the public from speaking out against the war.
Back here! Remember to stop the bleeding!
And Devalle, the medic, having survived another rescue mission, brings back his wounded man. Who is it? Who is it? The question spreads down the line. Oh, Christ, it's Hero, the sergeant who likes to walk point. How bad is it? A couple of leg wounds.
We were walking down the trail.
Perimeter out here.
I was walking point, and we noticed a side trail. It was one of the side trails we came down and had more use on it than when we first came down it. So I looked up and spotted it was an NVA. He had a green uniform, had an AK, and it was like a quick draw whole thing. I opened up in him, he opened up in me. Yeah, I'm afraid it works that way, but he's lying up there on the trail.
Roger that. We haven't taken fire.
I got hit in both legs.
Pop smoke, 4-3. Pop a smoke over here.
Propaganda was something that was used broadly during the Vietnam War, which is also referred to as the Second Indochina War. In the article, Propaganda in the Public, The Shaping of Opinion in the Southern Vietnamese Countryside During the Second Indochina War by David Hunt, propaganda is discussed as being a major tool used during the Vietnam War. Everyone in the country utilized some kind of propaganda, whether it was newspaper ads or radio ads. Even people that weren't literate still interacted with and read propaganda. In spite of low levels of literacy in the Mekong Delta, print documents made an impact because reading tended to be a social as well as an individual activity, with the best reader stepping forward and reading aloud to others. Some even said it helped them become more knowledgeable. Propaganda also helped to spread news to citizens. It often would reach large masses of people, causing the people affected by war to be up to date on what is going on. People would often listen to different radio propaganda sources, depending on what they thought was accurate. A second informant estimated that radio emissions were 70% true, while others declared the city newspapers were 50%. Many people considered propaganda to be a weapon used during the Vietnam War that would shape people's opinions. In the article, The Role of Weapons in the Second Indochina War, Republic of Vietnam, Perspectives and Perception by Martin Loisano, propaganda is referred to as a weapon used in the Vietnam War. Propaganda was so powerful during the Vietnam War that many countries used it as a weapon. Simple advertisements in the newspaper or on the radio could change people's opinions in minutes. Fighting countries used propaganda against one another to convince their own citizens that the war was necessary and they should support it. The Second Republic of Vietnam's leaders attempted to use propaganda about communist weapons as evidence of their enemy's strength relative to their own, but also as a symbol of confidence to empower the South Vietnamese population. The leaders of Vietnam wanted their people to get behind the troops and encourage them, which is something propaganda helped with.
Propaganda being used as a weapon between opposing countries was a common theme during the Vietnam War. In the case of East and West Germany, they had different approaches to distributing propaganda. In the article, The Vietnam Legion by Peter Bush, East Germany is described to have a state-controlled newspaper which would spout sensationalized stories as facts, such as officers of the West German Air Force, Neues Deutschland, claimed were flying terror attacks against Vietnam's people. Some 120 soldiers from the Federal Republic of Germany, FRG, were fighting side by side with the American aggressors, and in the process, 6 had died, 13 had been wounded, and 2 had gone missing. Bush 164. On the other side, West Germany did not have a state-controlled media. West German authorities maintained an unofficial network that enabled them to publish camouflage propaganda and plant articles in West German newspapers authored by the Psychological Warfare Section, Bush 167. It was important for West Germany to appear like they were not in control of the media, so they could push propaganda to the public only when necessary.
The media, the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War is often referred to as the first television war. Media coverage showed the American public the reality of a foreign war, detached from the government's optimistic depiction, uncensored on their televisions at home. During the 1960s, there was a huge increase in television ownership in American households, and news shows became a popular source of information. Video technology was also improving, and lightweight portable camcorders and audio recording equipment allowed journalists and reporters to capture the war close up and in great quantity. This would prove problematic for the U.S. government when it came to censorship. Stories could be live or edited, which could be done rapidly with film being sent to and transmitted from Tokyo. In the first years of the war, the media portrayed a positive image of the conflict, with a clear U.S. victory in sight. News reports focused mainly on communism and the Cold War, and the U.S. government happily allowed journalists access to American troops and the Vietnam battlefield. The media started to move towards a negative stance, as it was apparent how brutal President Diem's regime was in the South. In the United States, the civil rights and anti-war movements influenced the mainstream media into criticism of U.S. policies. The number of correspondents increased as the war intensified. Most stayed in Saigon to report, but some went to the front lines and came across the same risks as the soldiers. Around 60 journalists were killed during the war. The unrestricted access given to correspondents became detrimental during the Tet Offensive in 1968, where a pessimistic, inevitable defeat was portrayed in the news. President Johnson would say upon watching CBS anchorman Walter Cronkite's report on Vietnam, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America." The controversy over the media's role in the eventual American defeat in the Vietnam War came about from the reporting on the Tet Offensive as a complete communist victory, which was misleading to the public. However, it is also argued by some historians that the media reporting during the Vietnam War was mainly reflective of the situation, and that it was largely supportive of the U.S. effort, with the main factor of American public disillusionment being the rising number of American casualties.
In order to continue the war support and avoid protests, the Johnson administration and the Nixon administration had to use ample amounts of protest. The Vietnam War was one of the longest wars America has been in. Because of this, it was also one of the most fatal wars and caused mass injury. The lucky ones that returned unharmed often had trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder from everything that happened around them. The term credibility gap was created to define the difference between the lies and propaganda from the truth about the war. Jefferson was able to justify airstrikes on the northern Vietnamese people by claiming that they attacked our ships unprovoked. However, this was mere propaganda. Due to weather problems and overeager radar men, rumors spread, but there were no actual sightings from the Maddocks. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was the main reason American intervention occurred in Vietnam and was provoked by Johnson's call for military pressure. This call for military pressure caused American destroyers and other boats along with soldiers to press up to the boundaries of the conflict and wait for retaliation. The second the North Vietnamese retaliated to this encroachment, there were conveniently nearby boats waiting to respond, and eventually led to the passing of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution by Congress. This changed public opinion on the war and sent roughly 500,000 American troops into Vietnam.
In the article entitled Sailing in the Shadow of the Vietnam War, Horton incorporates that the numerous Vietnam solidarity campaigns became the centerpieces of its analysis of the capitalist system and was essential to the propaganda war against the imperialist West. The narrative became more convincing to the public the longer the war continued. Horton states even American officials had to concede that they had handed the East German government an important strategic advantage. In this regard, a public opinion that was surveyed by the United States Information Agency placed emphasis on the Vietnam War providing to be the upper hand for the GDR propaganda war with East German audiences. Another point is East Germany's main party newspaper had accused the U.S. of a war of aggression relating to the Gulf of Tonkin crisis. Horton expresses President Johnson and the American Congress were purposely provoking a war in Vietnam. Once the Gulf of Tonkin resolution had passed by Congress, GDR condemned early bombing campaigns that were at odds with North Vietnam. This then called attention to the worldwide protests in opposition to the U.S. actions and placed itself on the side of North Vietnamese people in the conflict. In the journal article entitled Military Propaganda Defense Department Films from World War II in Vietnam, expresses that American military propaganda was altered during World War II when Hollywood directors went to work for the government. Believing that it incorporated a sense of drama into documentary formats, such as the film Why Vietnam, it rejected dramatic techniques introduced by Hollywood directors and turned instead to ethnographic imagery and pseudoscientific approach to persuade their viewers. In order to exaggerate the claims that were made, the Vietnam propaganda films exhibited to be scientific. The film Why Vietnam attempts to condense the entire Vietnam conflict and American involvement. This then stirs up emotions such as fear of the enemy in order to defend America's increased involvement in the war. Moreover, the Defense Department released Why Vietnam to the flower of the youth in high schools and colleges as well as in the armed forces. This then led to a shift in attention from the enemy to Vietnam's urgent need for American assistance, making the comparability of military service in Vietnam equal to joining the Peace Corps. Using this tactic as a way of getting the youth to serve manipulates them into thinking that it's their duty to fulfill this upcoming step in their lives. It is very clear that propaganda played a major role in changing public opinion during the Vietnam War. Propaganda affected everyone and everything people experienced in everyday life. Many forms of propaganda were used, which were all effective in changing people's opinions and informing citizens that were affected by the war going on. People used propaganda as a way to come together as well. It was a tool that helped many during the 19 dreadful years of the war. No matter who, everyone could have easy access to many forms of propaganda. Propaganda overall was an extremely useful and effective tool that helped the public form and alter their opinions during the years of the Vietnam War.